Kimberly, so I'm new to response-based practice. Tell us what response-based practice is about and the advantages, the benefits of it.
Give you a bit of my history with response-based practice. I managed and was a practicing counsellor for about 9 years of a domestic violence and sexual assault counselling and crisis service, right? In that time, my training was all about, violence and understanding violence and people's experiences of violence. What I'd find is that a lot of women would come into the service who were, at the same time that they were referred to violence counselling, they were referred to the mental health team. And so then I'd have someone sitting in front of me with an experience of some sort of violation from usually someone they knew, but they were grappling with their biggest worry was, am I crazy? Am I unwell, mentally unwell? Because at the same time they were going to a mental health service who was describing them in pathologizing terms. So hypervigilant or tangential thinking, which means that people are talking about different things and going in different directions, depressed, anxious, all of these kinds of pathological kind of descriptions. And so I spent most of my time working with people to try and undo those dominant ideas about pathology in terms of their experiences and just come back to them, who they are, what their experience was like, the meaning that it made for them, and what they hope for. And then trauma-informed practice came along because in the 2000s, there was more of a recognition of, there might be a context to someone's distress. So there was context to someone's distress. So like, we've got PTSD, trauma, war veterans. And so then it became really quite common to start talking about trauma. And then to some degree that was helpful because I then didn't find that I was fighting as much with the mental health services about what the etiology of the problem was, because people were understanding, oh, well, of course they're going to be feeling anxious at night because that's when the rape happened. Do you know what I mean? So there was a bit of understanding more from the mental health side of things. But then I did some trauma training and I came back and I thought, I've got this newfound understanding of the way the brain works and neurobiology. And I came back and I schooled my clients into the reason why you did that and you responded that way is because of this, this, and that. So you went into fight, flight, or freeze, or fawn, and you had no control over this, or you flipped your lid, or like all of these different ways that trauma discourse plays out in the therapeutic context or in the psychoeducational context. And then what happened was, it was the end of the conversation. It was like, okay, I've explained for you what you did and why you did it. I don't have any more questions. That's the end of the conversation. And it wasn't satisfying for the women. When someone who has experienced some sort of adverse event or violence experiences a sense of disempowerment, like inability to do what they wish they could have done in that situation, the idea of trauma-informed practice just reinforces that you couldn't have done anything differently because you went into fight, flight, or freeze and that was your autonomic response and you had no control over that. So that was even more disempowering because it was then neurobiological. There was a science to it. Then came along, I just happened to come along response-based practice. And response-based practice is the idea that people are always responding. So people are responding in taking into consideration their physical setting, their social setting, their physical size, age, what time of day it was, who else was around, what they have done before, what they think would happen if they took this action as opposed to this action. So people are always responding, even in moments where the smartest, most safest thing to do is to not move and to play, feign, or just to not move. And they go into their minds to escape. They go into somewhere else. That is a very skillful thing to do. And where people go in their minds to escape the present is also where they go, where they taken to, what they hold on to in that not being present is a very skillful thing to do, particularly when you have to stay there for a period of time. People are extraordinary in the way they respond. That's response-based practice, is that people are always responding, and they're responding in accordance to the context. It's not an autonomic response. I'm not saying that you can't shit yourself in a situation where, you feel like life-threatening or whatever. I'm not saying that that doesn't happen. But for the most part, when we think about our responses start with our perception of when did we start to think that something wasn't okay. Like, you said before, you saw your mum's eyes and you knew that something was going to happen. And then you would manage your response according to what time of day it was, whether she had a medication, maybe, I don't know. You would have been considering a whole bunch of things, and you would have known so much detail that no one else, no counsellor, no psychiatrist, would ever have the level of understanding about what you knew and what all the considerations that you had made with yourself, your brother, your dad. The other part of response-based practice is the social response. Sometimes the most harmful experience is not the violence or the adverse event, but the way that the social responders responded to you. So Sean, for example, asking you how you felt, like you could have punched him in the face, right? Like,
Yeah.
like it was bad enough to go through what you went through, but then, so the social responses often is where I find most of my conversations are. So the quality of the social response is usually pretty poor, or it's in the form of police who are forcing victims to make their statements before they're ready, or it's a court process that scrutinizes her and paints her out to be the perpetrator and not him. There are social responses that do more harm or exacerbate or are violent on top of the violence itself, that mediate whether or not someone can, feel like they can get through the experience.
Would that also be like, for example, when I would talk about my mum's experience and the struggles that I had, and at some point I even felt like I hated my mum, and I would express my anger, not because I actually hated her, I hated the situation, right?
Yeah.
My response, which I think would be the social response that you're talking about, is, well, why would you express yourself in that way about your mum? I just don't think that that's like a good daughter response, and that just would throw you off, and it would even make you would make me feel worse. So that's kind of what you're talking about with the response.
That would not be very helpful. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. And in fact, the thing that I have found across my years of experience is, if we just listen to understand not just the person, but the context and what they had available to them, and the meaning that they're making, when you understand those things, then the pathology there's no room for pathology. The words depression and anxiety just don't fit. They're like one word to describe anything, really. Like, people use, now we used to talk about stress, then we talk about depression, anxiety, and now we're talking about trauma. They're words that reduce people's lived experience to basically, you can imagine whatever it is that you want. What we're interested in response-based practice is, what questions can we ask so that we understand, and not just that we understand, but that you get that I get it. Do you know what I mean? I'm not just in social work, we're trained to reframe, or to just active listening or reframing. And, so what I'm hearing you say, Sandra, is that you're fearing judgment, and it's like, no, I just don't want people to think that I hate my mum, because I don't. Like, let's come back to what it was that you said, rather than making it look like I want you to get that I understand without actually understanding. Like, I don't have to do the hard work to understand if I'm just going to say, so what it sounds like. No. Take me out of it. And what are you saying? Because I think a lot of people just want to feel understood.
Right. Exactly.
And if you're not understood, then what's the point of the conversation? This is just my perspective. I think understanding is so much better than empathy.
Mm.
Because empathy is a way you position yourself, and it's kind of like it's something you're trying to do, whereas understanding is doing. Like you will get if I understand you or I don't understand you. You will know. But you also know when I'm pretending to be empathetic.
Oh, that's true.
You know what I mean? I think empathy is more performative. I use this example with my students sometimes. I was at a meeting with the Child Protection Services and I was supporting a mum whose children had been stolen by the system, and she was sitting next to me, and across from her was her caseworker and the practice lead, so like a social worker who was supposed to be like supporting good practice. So he says to her, she was getting really frustrated in the meeting, and he says to her, I understand how difficult this must be for you to be sitting here with us after, we took your baby. And she's like, oh, do you understand? Do you? Like, she's like, how he was like, we understand, and she's like, oh, do you now? And like, oh my God, it was so funny. She was just like, call out the bullshit empathy, right? Call out
Yeah. I get it.
I'm like, don't do that, mate. You asked for that. You asked for that response because you were so patronizing in your empathy. The intention of your empathy was to get her to think that you actually gave a shit so that you could then do what you were about to do next to her. That's how subtle and manipulative it can be. And then it's like, but they said they understood.
No, and how frustrating. I mean, at least she was able to say, oh, do you now? So you do understand, right? But for example, me, when I gave Sean a dirty look and I was just like, I walked away with that frustration. I mean, I still think about that, not often, but when it comes up, it's like, oh, that motherfucker. I'm sorry.
Well, can I ask? Well, I'm keen to understand, like, learn from you at that point in time at 9 years old. You're sitting next to him at Rosal Hospital, and he's asking you how you felt and that frustration that you experienced when you walked away. Can you like explain that? Because at 9 years old, you had an understanding of something there not being. What was it?
That the police officer knocked my mum to the ground, cuffed her in front of me, raised her to her feet and dragged her out to the patrol car. And now we're in a psychiatric hospital, which I didn't even know it was a psychiatric hospital. You're a kid, you're in another world. And he's like, so how do you feel? How the fuck do you think I feel? And I was like, this is the dumbest question I ever heard. Like, I'm traumatized, dude. Like it goes without saying. Common sense. It's the dumbest question.
Dumbest questions, right?
Yeah.
And that's all he had. That's all he had.
That was it, because when I gave him the dirty look and I said, how do you think I feel? Like, and my tongue could have lashed him. Like, he just sat there like, okay, didn't talk. It was just dead silence.
What do you think he could have done in that moment to have recovered himself?
I think if he had said, Sandra, I'm sorry, I think it's quite obvious that this is a difficult situation for your family. Is there anything that we can do to help you guys? I know that you can't see your mum right now, but maybe we can accompany you guys tomorrow. Maybe we can have somebody talk to you. I mean, he could have come back from that, but it comes back to what you said before, which is humility. It's reading the room and then coming back down, like taking it down 2 notches and saying, shit, that was a wrong approach. We had 3 police cars outside our house. I mean, that was just traumatizing. And then the neighbors were looking out. It was just like, I was so embarrassed, but my mom's sick, and then like, it was just terrible. So he was there for all of that. And you ask a kid that sort of a question, it's like, well, then you mustn't have been there at all. Like, what the hell?
Yeah. It's almost like as a professional or as an expert, you're supposed to know. We train social workers up to get to the point, 4 years of a degree to know shit, right? Like, where does humility fit in the knowing of shit? Like it's kind of like an oxymoron. Whereas I think that the skill is in not knowing, you know. The skill is in putting aside your understanding and getting the experience of the person who's in front of you. That requires skill, but that's not coming from a position of knowledge. You know what I mean? And the other thing I wanted to ask you was, did you think that the response with the three police cars and the social worker there was, and then you said my mum was sick. Did you feel that response from a police response was commensurate, was fitting for what was happening at the home at the time?
No, absolutely not. It was like,
Yeah.
what happened? I didn't get what my mum had done to merit so
Yeah.
many police
Yeah.
cars.
To
Uh,
warrant that kind of response.
yeah,
Yeah.
that traumatized me because
Yeah.
when you've never had contact with a police officer and then all of a sudden there's all of these patrol cars and then you've got the police saying your mum has to come with us, otherwise we're going to forcibly take her. And then I was taken to the kitchen. I was with a female police officer and she's like, no, you can't. I was trying to get away to be with mum, and then I heard the massive thump and I got away from her just in time to see mum on the ground with the cuffs. And Sean was there the whole time. He was in the living room because I was in the kitchen.
And what did it mean to you when you say Sean was there the whole time? Why did you say that?
Because when he asked me, how are you feeling, it's like, well, didn't you
Mm.
see everything?
Yeah,
It's
how
not
do you
like
feel? How are you feeling? Yeah.
how would you feel
Mm.
exactly? I wanted to ask you the resources and the avenues available for other children of schizophrenic parents or mentally ill parents. What can we do? I know that when I was a kid, when I was an adolescent, a young adult, I was desperate and basically I dealt with everything on my own. I didn't reach out. I didn't know what to do. So, what can other people do to kind of aid them in their process?
That question, if you'd asked me a few years ago, I probably would have been talking about the importance of getting mental health services involved or support services. There was, I think it still exists, children of parents with a mental illness kind of service. I think it's important to recognise children and young people also as carers. But I recently went to a workshop last week, where I was supporting carers. And one woman said she was caring for her son, and she said, my son and I are one. I am not doing this for any other reason that I love my son, and my son and I are deeply, deeply connected. And she said, I would not have to sacrifice and forego everything that I have to do on a daily basis if he was just getting the supports that he needed. And I just thought, I think it's important, particularly children, is that we don't give them all the responsibility of having to do the caring, but also that we recognize that they are doing it and that we need to be led by them in terms of what it is that they think needs to happen. What's going to make a difference to them? And as we've heard about in your sharing today, which I'm really grateful for, some of the social institutional responses that we receive are really violent, right? And, I think just a word of caution that helping isn't always helping. I want to look more towards community-based responses where family, friends, neighbours, school community, your multicultural group community, where people can, as a community, do it the old way and take care of each other. I know people are busy, but the more we do community responses and move away from the risks associated with the helping profession, I think will make things a lot better. What are your thoughts about that?
Having a community behind you is a significant amount of support. See, we didn't have that.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
even friends, siblings, if mum had have had her own support group, my mum is Mexican, your mum's Mexican. When you think the distance between Australia and Mexico, it's just so far away. It's not like you can say, I'm going to go away for a week and just, there's so much going on to make a trip happen, right? So if my mum had have been ill here, then she would have had her sisters and it would have been different. And probably the family would have come in to look after my brother and I and give us that support. And also, I think now, I live alone, and I've realized that when I'm not in a good way, I do need to seek out my people. I can't just take it on my own. But, when you're a kid, it's different. And also, I mean, I'm talking to you as a 44-year-old woman. I've found my own way and found the things that help me. When you're a kid and you rely on, first of all, your parents, and then you go outside of that, which is, your family, and then you've got your support group, which is your friends and the activities you have outside of the home, like school and maybe sports and things like that, which help to balance.
What would it have been like for you if you had either a group to go to where other people around your age had similar experiences, either to talk about the similarity or the challenges, or just to know that there were other people out there that were going through what you were going through? What difference would that have made?
Would have been massive. It's so funny to think that you would be the only person in the world to go through something like this, but that's how I felt. I felt that it was only us, and that, we'd been dealt like this terrible hand. And now with this page, and I've been in touch with other children with schizophrenic parents, everybody felt that way. And so when you talk about, these bizarre situations that we all had to go through, because in the beginning you mentioned that schizophrenia, it's not like there's just one definition, because every patient, and this is something that I've become aware of interviewing other people, every patient has a different degree of severity. When I think of my mum and then think of my friends who their mums were in a really bad way, became aggressive and attacked their kids. I mean, we didn't go through that. Not to say that it wasn't any less hellish. It was. No schizophrenic patient is the same as another. So that's why it's not that it's ambiguous. I mean, there are common threads, It's not like you can just, this is it. Yeah. So it's a complex mental illness.
Yeah. I think that those kinds of supports are much more powerful than any kind of professional intervention, in terms of understanding, in terms of breaking down the isolation. When you think about counseling, you're isolated in a room with someone who probably doesn't know anything about what you're experiencing. Whereas if you're a group, or you're with some other people who kind of like don't judge you for who you are and aren't looking at you from a, top-down lens. They're just your peers. I think there needs to be more of that kind of stuff. It's upon us as social workers, I think, or anyone, to make community. And you're doing that now. You're doing that. This is the way you've responded to that not knowing and that feeling of isolation and that experience of, hell. And what difference would that have made? Yeah, and you're doing that now.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that I would have loved to have had as a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you're doing it now. You're doing it. Thank you so much for all the kids that are going to see this.
Oh, Kimberly. Well,
people who were kids.
Sorry?
All the people who were kids.
Yeah, exactly. Kimberly, I really appreciate the time that you've taken. I know you're super busy and you're a super mom, and you're like go, go, go. But I absolutely appreciate you taking the time to.
Thank you. Thank you for your beautiful questions.
Oh, Kimberly, thanks so much. And I'll see everybody in the next interview. So thank you all for watching. Till next time.